Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this week we are welcoming in Taylor Keene, and he is a cosmologist, a mythologist, a student of the religions and lore and legends of First Nations. He is, in fact, First Nations. He's an author. I recently heard him on Earth Ancients. I reached out to him. He was kind enough to say he would be willing to do this show. So again, I thank Cliff Dunning, who's always been willing to introduce me to guests and share his guests. I'm not sure if he brokered this introduction or not, but it doesn't matter. I can't thank him enough, just generally. So Taylor, thanks so much for being in the garden. Welcome.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and to share.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed the show on Earth Ancients. You told stories wonderfully. You have a ton of knowledge, and it's pretty hard to get actual people from the First Nations to speak on podcasts anyway about this stuff. So at least for me, it's been a bit of a journey. So I really appreciate that. But I guess first things first, we should probably let you introduce yourself properly to the audience.
Okay. Well, I have several different names, one of which is Taylor Keene. That's my Western given name, but I carry other names, my tribal names, amongst the Omaha people, which means the people that move against the current. I carry the name of Bison, Maine, and I'm of the Earthen clan moiety of the Bison clan. So we have Sky clans and we have Earth clans, and I'm from the Earth clan group. And amongst the Cherokee, I don't have a formal clan name, even though I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. But the Cherokee nickname that I've always had all my life is Blackberry, because that's what my mother was picking whenever I came into this world.
I have a question for you right off the bat that I wasn't planning to ask a question this early on. I cannot remember where I got this, but it was probably the grade courses or somewhere in that nature, or a book, purportedly a nonfiction book, where they said that in the First Nations there's 4 clans: Bear, Buck, Eagle, and I can't remember the other. I apologize, but obviously if there are four and I named three correctly, and they said, no matter what tribe you're in, even if your tribes are at war or nations are at war or states or culture, I know there's different words that different groups use. And I want to use the right term. I just don't know it or them. That even if the groups are at war, if you are from the Bear Clan and you meet people from the Bear Clan from that other group, they must give you hospitality, guest privileges. Is there anything to that?
Yes and no. Well, first of all, not all tribes have a clan structure. I know a lot of the Siouan groups do not. Lakota, Nakota, Dakotas. And my guess is that was an aberration to some degree. But most tribes have clans, and as far as I'm aware, there's no such commonality that's that neat and clean in terms of which clans they do have. My interpretation of the clan system is that it is fluid over time for tribes, because typically a clan structure has to do with both physical and spiritual survival. So, for example, our modern day Cherokee clans, at least out of one of our migration stories, comes from the chapter in the book, from my book Rediscovering Turtle Island, is an island in the east, and it refers to where the Cherokees were before coming to the Americas, and it said that we came from an island in the east. So I assume that means the Atlantic. And on this island were large volcanoes and big turtles. So that makes me think of like the Galapagos area. And then eventually the volcanoes and water overcame the island, which makes me think of earthquake or an eruption and then a ensuing tsunami. Graham Hancock's show and theory is around an ancient apocalypse, and at least with the tribal Cherokee story there, that seems to line up, and that caused a calamity, and those that survived got on canoes and made their way to South America and then eventually migrated north. Those that survived and escaped in our migration story, that became our now 7 clans. And so my guess is once they arrived somewhere that was a little more stable, they looked at their surroundings, assessed what would be necessary for survival, and your clans get adjusted around that. Most tribes seem to orientate around the number 7 for clans. Not all clans have the different moieties, meaning like earth, sky, or water clans, but many of them do. But my guess is it's an interesting combination of what's important for survival. For example, within the Omahas, and this is just a loose categorization because I can only really truly speak for knowledge of my own clan. But it appears to me that a lot of the earthen clans are there for physical sustenance. So Bison Clan, there is some other ones like elk, but bird and turtle and all of those. But there are sky clans that are associated, but they're often, they have different rights and responsibilities. For example, there's a Sky Bison clan, and from what little I know about it, which is not a ton, it seems to be that a lot of their duties had to do with ceremonies or other things within the tribe. And then you get into complex structures around who has pipes, who has tents that hold sacred things, etc. But in the end, it's a careful balance. It's a division of labor, of duties. But I know, for example, in my clan, the men's names all have to do with bison, and they're all attributes of a healthy herd. one isn't given a name based off something that happened in the world. There's a fixed number of those clan names, and they're always there. And so somebody older than you, if you're lucky, like myself, one of my grandpas at a certain point, when he felt that I had earned the understanding of my name, he told me the full implication of mine. And so the literal translation means the mane of a bison. And when I finally earned the right, I was in a prayer ceremony, and my job was to be the fire chief. And in most ceremonial things, there's some loose associations, but fire usually belongs to men in a sacred sense, and water belongs to women because they carry the water of life within them. And it was my duty to take care of the sacred fire. And the main part of the understanding is that you work for the road chief, thus meaning the road of life, who's in charge of the ceremony. And culmination of the ceremony has to do with an important prayer that happens around midnight. So at that point, we are supposed to be still and quiet. That means that I can't stoke my fire or anything else, and that's my job. And the fire is symbolic of spirit. Christians would call her the Holy Spirit, but that fire is symbolic of her moving into and creating a nice environment for everyone and touching their hearts. And so when that fire goes down, everybody gets a little anxious. But because fire belongs to men, other men within the ceremony, if I ask them, they can help me. Well, on this occasion, the road chief who was taking care of the ceremony had a lot to talk about in the prayer. So it took a while. My fire was going down and getting more smoky, but I'm not supposed to bother it.
Right.
That's what I was instructed to do. So these younger men and teenage boys kept coming up and asking me if they could help me with my fire. And not knowing the full rules, they just wanted to build the fire. And I was polite at first, and I finally had to get pretty strong with them and tell them that it was my fire, and they needed to sit down and pay attention to the prayer.
No loopholes.
And so that act, my grandpa, and we're all related in the tribe. We have a different kinship system, but he's in my clan. And the next morning, he was given the honor of being the orator at the luncheon that happens after the ceremony, and it's a big feast. And he gets to go home and get all cleaned up and come back and tell everyone that showed up for the meal and who were not there for the ceremony what happened. And so they typically give thanks to all those different chiefs. And when he got to me, he said, grandson, I was watching you last night, and he said, you finally earned your name. We're told at a young age that we're supposed to embody and become our clan names.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Well, it's sort of an existential question, and it's in the tribal world, those are the kind of things that you live for whenever you're told further meanings, especially when it has to do with you and your life. And so I was quite keen to understand what he meant. And so he's talking to me, but he's talking to me in front of the tribe.
Right.
That's how tribes work. And so he told everyone else, he said, by the way, my grandson here, if you ask him, he'll tell you what his Indian name translates to. And he said, he'll tell you bison mane. And then he looks at me and says, well, that's not the full meaning. Would you like to know what your real name is? I said, of course.
Yes, right.
And he said, I was watching you with that fire and how all those young men in the ceremony kept pestering you trying to work your fire, but I know as you do that you're not supposed to do that while he's praying, and they're supposed to be paying attention too. And finally, you were pretty stern with them and told them that that's what they were supposed to be doing, and they all sat down and went quiet. And he said, I'm going to tell you about your Indian name because I carried the same name too, and when I finally earned it, my grandpa told me. And he said the alpha male to become the alpha, the bison within a herd have to fight for the right to sire. And in the process, their body changes, much like a gorilla becomes a silverback. By becoming dominant, their body is filled with testosterone and adrenaline, and it changes their body.
Mm-hmm.
And the alpha bison, you can tell, because their head becomes massive and elongates to the point where it almost touches the ground. If you've ever seen a buffalo head nickel from way back,
sure,
that was one of the last bison. He was interred at a zoo. I want to say D.C., but somewhere out east. And he looked like that, but that's what a true alpha looks like. The head will elongate almost to the ground and build this great big hump on the back. And the very last aspect is the big mane or the beard of the bison. And he said, "You acted like the true alpha last night. You finally earned your name. Congratulations." And so after that, some of the younger men in the tribe and when they heard all that and they watched me do it, they would tease me and call me Pretty Bull.
Okay, well, kids are going to be kids. There was
That's right.
so much there. And I mean, so one, the four clans thing sounded lovely, but it did sound like one of those things which was way too simplistic to be across the board anywhere. So
I wish it were that easy, but back to your question, I have seen affinity with other tribes between the clans. That's if, however, things are peaceful between the tribes. I would imagine that would all go out the window.
Well, this particular person said otherwise, but I wish I could remember what maybe it was fiction. Maybe, maybe it was fiction, and it
sounds a bit romanticized. But...
Yeah. The other thing is, I mean, obviously we have four elements. You said things are built around the number 7, which, I mean, that's practically
4 and 7.
Yeah.
Seven's important because of many of the tribes say that we come from the Seven Sisters constellation, the Greeks call Pleiades.
Right. Do you have any? I mean, is it because that is an origin story, a creation story that like the Star People story? I mean, I have heard that too in other contexts. I've also heard, basically it's the phases of the moon, but not exactly, and that it's also the 7 wanderers, which, I mean, obviously our sky right now, I'm on the East Coast of the United States. The sky that I look out now is not bright enough to see the 7 sisters, or the 7 wanderers, the sun, the moon, and 5 planets, not including the Earth. But
I think there's a lot of parallels there with the teachings. In my book, I start with a chapter called Cosmogenesis, and in essence, I'm looking at the generic term for the variations of that creation and migration story, the Earth Diver myth.
Mm-hmm.
So that has to do with the journey of the souls, which is terribly important, which has to do with the dark rift of the Milky Way. But I share a version of that story in the book. It's just one version that resonated with me as a younger person. But in essence, whenever the souls or stars in the sky from across the universe ask the question, the existential question of who am I? And then there's 4 of them, that the Omahas believe that we come in and out of this world in 4s. That when 4 of them ask that question, then they begin on the journey of the souls, and the first ones to come here, that was the question. And when they arrived on this planet, it was all covered in water, and depending on the tribe, there's 4 different animals, and that varies quite a bit, which I think has to do with the antiquity of that story. And in some cases, turtle is typically involved, and that's where the title of the book, Rediscovering Turtle Island, comes from. Because depending on the tribe, there's different animals who dive down into the primordial waters, retrieve the clay, and bring it up to a turtle who sacrifices himself and puts the clay on his back, and the land is born out of there. So people always ask the question, well, is that the United States? Is that North America? And my answer is that it's the whole land, the whole world.
Right.
Upon research, because as I would share versions of that story with other tribal peoples, typically those that had it, and most of them are vaguely familiar because it's a pretty common story. I was intrigued by the responses I would get from other tribal people who would say, you know, Taylor, that's pretty close. You almost had it right, but you have, you know, this one wrong animal or something. And of
Right.
course, you know, with all of our stories, all of our versions of religion as human beings, we all think we're right.
Right.
And so whenever I began to research it, because I was looking at all these variations and I was like, you know, why are there so many? Well, now I believe it's because it's of the antiquity of the story. And what I discovered is that the origins, the true origins of the story, predate our time coming here, and it originated in Siberia. I focus in on a Russian scholar who specializes in this, and that unto itself, that the story originates from one of the places where we came from at least 15,000 years ago. And now, White Sands, New Mexico, we've got footprints in limestone that have been carbon dated as 23,500 years ago.
Yeah.
Who knows how old that story is?
Things just keep getting older.
Yes, it's at least as old as when indigenous peoples journeyed here. So that's kind of mind-boggling to me, but it's fascinating. I thought it was a great place to begin the book of understanding, because that story is so iconic to many of the major language family tribes. So you'll find that amongst the Siouans, the Algonquin-speaking tribes, and the Iroquoians, with lots of different variations.
All of the animals, though, are aquatic, but a lot of them are also amphibious, or like I think beaver, which is one of them, and
it just depends on the tribe. The version that I share in the book, it's otter. There's a waterfowl. Sometimes it's a swan, I've heard, and the version that I focused in on has a deer in it, and the deer was not made for water, which is why they had to hurry. Otherwise, the deer was going to drown.
What about the alligators or crocodilians?
One of the Cherokee versions has a crawdad as the animal that goes down in to retrieve.
Interesting. I wonder.
The version that I share is otter, but I mean, I've never seen a paper like lay out all the different versions, but I've seen so many variations of that story.
I'm just going to ask you two more, then I'm going to move off. It's like, I don't know, this is pivotally important, but I mean, I'm wondering if in some of the more northern climes, if it's not, orca and like polar bear, an animal like that.
I don't know if I've not heard that version of this story in the Athabascan-speaking tribes, but I don't know. In general, I've found that the commonalities that I found with my ancestors, who were Siouan and Iroquoian, I used to think that there was a lot of variations till I started thinking about, wait a minute, we have all these commonalities. We have the Earth Diver myth, even though there's different variations. We also have some of the same deities of the indigenous pantheon. We both have the tree of life in our cosmology. We have the tripart universe represented in the tree of life, the upper realm, the lower realm, and the middle realm in which we reside.
Mm-hmm.
Grandmother Spider has a prominent place in both of the stories, whether it's helping take embers of the one true fire from the Cherokees from our island in the east that was overcome by water and volcanoes. She carried, the most important sacred thing, because the one fire is symbolic of the unity of Cherokees. Grandmother Spider to the Omaha has to do with she is woven the web of the universe up in the sky as a part of the Orion constellation. But also, whenever there was a void created, whenever First Father who was from the upper realm and violated the rules and went down to the lower realm. It created a void in between, and Grandmother Spider wove the universe there.
Had to fill it in.
So you find a lot of these commonalities, but I don't know much about the Pacific Northwest or Athabascan tribes or the ones down in the Southwest. I think they may have different stories. Oftentimes, there's some commonalities between an island in the east, which I, of course, question and curious. That seems very similar to Atlantis, but some of the tribes out west have a story from an island in the west, and that reminds me of
Lemuria
or Mu.
Yeah.
So maybe there's different influences, but the thing that's most interesting to me is within all these cosmologies is the universality of some of the elements. Tree of Life is certainly one.
I don't know why there has to be one, why it has to be one Atlantis and one Mu. First of all, I mean, the timing could be, I mean, if it's only a few thousand years apart, that, time-wise, that's not a lot, but for human time-wise, that's a lot. But also, I mean, if in 100,000 years somebody dug back and, they found signs of New York, New York, the great culture, New York. Well, no, there's New York, London, Paris, Moscow, Tokyo, Mexico City, Atlanta, wherever I am, wherever you are. I mean, so why does it have to be just Atlantis or just Lemuria? Anyway, that's just, just throwing it out there. But
I wonder if different cultures have those stories, and while most of your listeners would understand Atlantis and Lemuria, but my point is that they may have been known by other names to other cultures, but maybe that explains some of the commonalities that I found in my research in writing my book. For example, we have the earthenworks from the Mississippian period, but in Northern Europe, you have very similar type of structures, maybe made out of different materials, most of them rock cairns, but circular objects orientated to the sun, moon, and stars, solstice alignments, etc. And they seem very similar. And if you're going to get even more specific, you have the Tree of Life over there as well, Ixodril, from the Celtic traditions, but all of the elements of the Pict culture seem to have a lot of comparisons. Little people and fairies, and we have similar things in our tribal stories. And even, first of all, I don't think it's a coincidence, but I wonder if those things came from these older civilizations. You speak of the antiquity of time, and if we're looking at indigenous peoples being in the Americas for 15 to 20,000 plus years, and there's certainly opportunity for science to find even more anthropological sites. I don't know why there's such a pushback against the antiquity. I don't know if that's part of the guilty conscience of European scientists, anthropologists who don't want to yield to the fact that indigenous peoples have been here for a very, very long time, and others have not. But there seems to be a real push to limit that time frame, but we keep finding more and more. And so I wonder how far back some of these universal symbols and themes of cosmology go, and if there were common origin societies or places or times or epochs that influenced all of them. One of the things we always say in the tribal core value system is we are all related, and that goes for all of us. So somewhere there's commonalities, and it's not that there can only be one place called Atlantis, but maybe we all were influenced because of different experiences there.
Well, they do say that every single Homo sapien sapien is related to mitochondrial Eve from the 70,000 year ago migration out of Africa. So, I mean, that, perhaps that's the source, those stories, and then who knows how long it would have taken those folks to get from wherever they started to, cross the Sinai or whatever they crossed at that point. I did want to go back to basic stuff. The 4 points. I mean, I'm assuming 4 has to do with the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west, and then we get the 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. I know in some Eastern religions or philosophies, there's 5. They have wood and metal as 2 separate ones, but I think for the most part, most cultures, religions, lore, legend have 4 as well. Have the 4 elements. Is it both of those things, or is it one or the other in your understanding?
There's a lot of sacred numbers, certainly the 4 directions. But as I was inferring from before, 4 has other meanings besides the 4 directions. In the Suian cosmology, which the Omahas are a part of, a lot of us will refer to the 4 hills of life. So the different ages, you have youth, and then your early adult years, and then your full adult years, and then your elder years. That's how we speak of things. But even with the 4 directions, that's the sort of one dimensional way of looking at it. If you want to take it into 3, you have the 4 directions, then you have up and down, and the center, where we reside as a person. And so that ties into things. One of my interpretations of what is a common Native American symbol, the 4 direction symbol, really has to do with a combination of those 4 points and the 3-dimensional of the 7 directions. If you were to take a cross-reference section of a tree of life, if you were just to cut things, that's how it would look. So I think that 4 direction symbol really has to do with the tree of life, which is an axis mundi in the universe, centers us. And while it points to the 4 directions, it goes up, it goes down, and there's a point within the middle. So I think that is a part of what's underlying a lot of the symbology of all things indigenous, is that incorporation of the relationship between 4 and 7 and the tree of life and the axis mundi.
That was great. I want to geek out a little bit into some of, and I don't hate to put it that way because I just put it that way and I can't take it back because we're recording. But I don't know, the origin story is that we came from the Pleiades, or the 7 sisters. So, is it believed that we came from the stars and that we still have family, people out there?
That's pretty much what the story is, although it's a bit more existential. I think it's our souls that traveled here, and our stories say that our souls go back there when our temporal bodies here expire. So in most of the conceptions, whenever a temporal body expires here, then, for example, with the Omaha tribe, the body will lay in state for 4 days, and we keep a fire going for them, and we have vigils where somebody stays up all night with the body. And the reason why we're doing that is because it takes at least 4 days for the soul to make the journey back home, and only then can we put the body back. So yes, we come from the stars and we go back to the stars from which we came. But almost all the tribes have stories about sky people, and those are often associated in our cosmological perspective as the thunderers or the thunder beings. And there's some fantastical artistic representations of them that I've found in my research. But I think that those beings are often associated with thunderbirds, which are the messengers of the thunder beings. And so I make some analogies in my in my book and research that there's a lot of commonalities between the true biblical description of the phoenix from the second book of Baruch. Most people don't, they think of the phoenix as being something from Harry Potter, but it's actually biblical.
Or the X-Men. Or the X-Men.
But the description of the experience of Baruch, who is quite similar to Enoch, who was taken up to heaven to see further things. And one of the things he sees as they're going to heaven is this great bird who, when its wings flapped, it sounded like thunder, and asks the angel, "What is that?" And the angel says, "It's the phoenix," and says, what does it survive upon? And that it eats the manna of heaven and the dew of earth. And when I read that and some of these works around the Lost Gospels, I was like, that sounds like a thunderbird. And whenever it flapped its wings, it clapped like thunder.
Mm-hmm.
So you find all these representations and commonalities, and that's what gives me hope in the world, that all those great stories, because stories are everything. We all love stories like this.
Well, all angels are messengers, right? But there's different, but there's all sorts of, there's different choirs of angels, and there's different classes of angels, and they have different physical descriptions. And probably if you talk to 100 different, experts in theology, you'll get probably 92 different descriptions, but at least one is the seraphim. That seraph is Hebrew for flying lizard or something, which sounds a little bit like a Chinese version of a dragon, right? But if it has wings, it could also be that thunderbird, that phoenix that we're talking about. I mean, like you're saying, it can all be the same thing or things,
just different lenses, interpretations of it.
Right. And even the level of moisture in the sky can change the way a sun looks. It can look hazier or more round. It's just, there's all sorts of things that can, obviously if you have the aurora borealis, you're probably gonna have a more interesting description of things that, come out of the night that are illuminated versus maybe, scarier things like a werewolf or a Bigfoot or whatever. Maybe not. I don't know. But maybe that's where some of the fairies and will-o'-the-wisps originate from. But there's definitely those commonalities. But earlier you said one of the pantheons, and I love pantheons, and I know that there's like 500 different groups at least, and you can't possibly do that. But what if there's one pantheon in particular, or if there's sort of archetypes, like there's like a Zeus type, a Thor type, a Athena type. I always hear Coyote the Trickster, which may or may not be a thing. I don't know. That's why I'm talking to an expert like yourself.
Depends on the tribe, but Trickster, yes. The one thing before we go to that, I just wanted to mention, we were talking about sky people, but we got into angels and different classifications, and the ones that I always find fascinating are the Nephilim, or the Watchers.
Mm-hmm.
And they certainly came here and had a relationship with the daughters of Earth, and the giants came out of it. And the giants is one of those aspects going now to the indigenous pantheon of things, of what I'm trying to flesh out of all this research, is to create an indigenous pantheon and to share some of those stories in a way. I'm just finishing up. Both works are quite long, but Stephen Fry's Mythos and Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
I would highly recommend those to your listeners who like mythology, because they start with one as the gods, but as you're more than aware, the Greek pantheon and their derivations have so much to do with what we talk about in everyday life. from words in the English language to concepts, and it's just so powerful. And that's one of the things that I aspire to do in future works, is to help flesh out the indigenous pantheon in a way that everyone could understand. One of those aspects of it that I've been able to understand has to do with the sort of Suean version of some of these. And you mentioned trickster, but out of the Suean pantheon, we have Earthmaker as creator, and from the upper realm sends total of 5 different soteriological or saviors of humanity to us to help things, one of which is just the one called trickster, and then there's the hare, as in rabbit type.
Rabbit, right? Yeah, not like what's left of my head.
Right. And then there's one called bladder, and ultimately the last one and turtle, forgive me. Turtle is one of those. And maybe that has to do with the creation story. I haven't figured that much out yet, but probably. And the last one is the one known as Redhorn, who was really from the upper realm, but emerged as one of the children of first father and first mother. And it's through him that the Thunder Twins are typically associated. And Redhorn, at a certain point, he was the youngest of, depends on the tribe, but youngest of 6 children. Sometimes there's 2 sisters. It just depends upon the tribe. They're known as the morning and the evening stars, just depending on the tribe. But sometimes the Thunder Twins come from one of the daughters. Sometimes they're from Redhorn. That seems to be the most common. But at a certain point, the brothers are teasing the one who at that point has a different clan name. And he finally says, "You all really shouldn't be teasing me, because I'm not really your brother. I'm really from the upper realm.
Right.
And I was sent down here for a specific purpose." And at that point, he spits into his hands and rubs his one big long braid, and it becomes the color of red ochre. And then he spits in his hands again and rubs his ears, and little human heads appear who have a mind and a life of their own, and he becomes the soteriological hero known as Redhorn. And there's lots of adventures amongst the Suean pantheon. A lot of these stories are embodied in petroglyphs and rock art from different places. And that's where they interact with thunderbirds and the underwater serpent, water spirits, and all of the aspects of the indigenous cosmology.
Does he actually have a horn on his head, or no?
It's the braid.
It's the braid.
He has a big long braid.
Do you think that's where all of this comes from? I'm going to ask you a question, and it might be indelicate, and the answer also may be it depends on the tribe, as it has before. But I hear all the time, but generally not from actual indigenous people. They say, "Oh, all the elders of the tribes, or all the people from the tribes, will tell you themselves that there were white giants with green eyes and red hair, or that there was a tribe of white Native Americans." And is there any truth to that, or is that just sort of, how white people sort of made Quetzalcoatl sort of like a Jesus figure, when Quetzalcoatl is by no means Caucasian, in the actual stories. So is there anything to it?
It's a great topic.
Yeah.
It's a great question. Thank you for that. Because that's what a lot of people hear. So I think it's a combination of both answers. I know in writing a book like this, as I was beginning to do all the research, I stumbled across a whole subculture of individuals who really want to believe that somehow white people were the saviors of indigenous peoples, or actually discovered America.
Or cannibalistic giants, which, why would you want to be that?
I
don't expect you to be answer that.
No. and as I begin to dissect this, because I first heard that version of Quetzalcoatl as a white man, and it upset me because I was like, here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some white person saying that somehow the true civilizer of everyone is a white person.
Right.
And I was like, what's the psychology of this? Because we're inventing things here to justify a conquest of a continent, basically.
Two.
But yes. As it turns out, it seems to be that the common narrative of where that comes from came from the narratives of the conquistadors from Spain.
Okay.
And whenever they first came, there were these stories of Quetzalcoatl, who was godlike, but in their arrogance and ego, they either thought, and again, there's major language barriers between the first indigenous people and the conquistadors, but maybe they did to some degree, were so intrigued by these different individuals that they treated them with some reverence or whatever. Obviously, that was mistrusted faith, because the conquistadors were beyond awful to the indigenous peoples that they encountered, and we forget that they were probably the bringers of smallpox, if not the bubonic plague from Europe. But it was their interpretations, in their ego and arrogance, that they said they saw us as gods.
Right.
So somewhere within that, and there's a number of works, but I think one is Fingerprints of the Gods from my friend Graham Hancock, who carried on that story, and then it gets a lot more traction as people carry on that story that, wait, Quetzalcoatl was really a white man, and that there has to be a civilizer of these nomadic savages. So there's a lot of psychology. Having said all of that, in the stories that I'm talking about, from the oral narratives of the Siouan peoples, there are stories of the giants, and in some of our stories that have to do with Redhorn, there is a female, because the humans and the previous race of the giants interact, and in many stories they have competitions, and in one they play a great game of stickball. I'm using the southeastern terms, the Iroquoian terms, but like the great Mesoamerican ball games, where the losing team loses their life, and in this case, Redhorn. First, they have a race with the giants, and he turns himself into an arrow, transmutes into an arrow, and wins the race. And then the giants are angry, and so they want a rematch in a sacred ball game, which they do, and Redhorn is basically the most valuable player and wins. And all the rest of the giants are sacrificed, except for one giant who is a female and who has red hair. And she pleads for them not to kill her, because she will marry one of the brothers. And depending on the tribe, sometimes she marries the oldest brother, but usually she ends up marrying Redhorn, and the Thunder Twins come out of that. So with every rumor, there's always a grain of truth, right? So, but I don't know where the account for the is it blue-eyed Mandans or the red-haired Mandans? That there's a Mandan tribe that was white. I don't know where that came from, but the Mandans are relatives of the Omahas, and I've never heard any tribal story that gives that, but that somehow goes to this morbid fascination with somehow white people were a part of this, or that they were adopted in or something. I don't know.
Yeah, listen, I have a show called Garden of Doom, and people tell me all the time, that there's this, that there's that. And I'm like, well, no, I don't know that, but tell
I appreciate your skepticism.
Yeah, tell me when I'm gonna listen to anything, but some of these feel very convenient, and I'm not exactly sure what the psychology is, as I suspect you're not sure, because nothing changes the fact that Europeans got here when they did, 1492-ish. Maybe some Vikings got here earlier, and up in northeast Canada, Newfoundland or whatever. But I mean, the Americas were populated. I mean, and
for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that was one of the serious reasons why I wrote the book, was to understand some of these questions. But one of the facts I always point out, which most Americans don't like to hear, but don't forget that this country is just barely under 250 years old, because we're about to have a big celebration. That's a speck of time.
Oh, yeah.
When you're talking about 23,500 years documented of indigenous peoples being here, to me, it's not even a question of antiquity, because that's being proven time and time over. By the time we get to the end, we may find that it's 50,000 years ago. And if we're talking about migrations of human beings out of Africa at 70,000, and the longest perspective of Homo sapiens is 300,000 years, and you've got 100,000 of some of those people becoming indigenous Americans, well, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out to listeners, and obviously I'm having a conversation with you as well, but when any peoples describe gods or figures from their stories as white, that shouldn't translate into your head as Caucasian. It probably should more likely translate as like the color of the moon or the stars, which is like,
maybe they were shining like versions of Moses.
I guess.
Was it Moses or Noah that was born?
I think it was Noah that was born. Noah. Lamech didn't recognize his.
He was shining.
Right. In some, but
maybe that's what white meant.
Yeah, but I doubt very much they look like me. I doubt they look like Builder's Neutral, paint one. I mean, so I think that white really meant white, not Caucasian, which is also a stupid name. I mean, being that the people in the Caucasus Mountains, anyway, this is the whole three races concept is nonsense. It was invented like in the 1800s by a eugenics dude. I mean, it's like we all
appreciate you saying that. That's something that most people don't really understand. That the eugenics movement, ironically, was born out of the Americas. Sadly, Hitler and Nazi Germany learned it from us, but the American eugenics movement had a big impact on indigenous peoples, and ultimately really impacted how we were viewed as humans or non-humans based upon race and all. And the early field of anthropology was rampant with it. In my book, I talk a lot about John Wesley Powell, who was the inaugural head of both the Smithsonian and the Bureau of American Ethnology. And there were others within there. I'm making a broad classification, but when you look at his writings, there was a lot of Aryan superiority, and that's where the Bering Strait theory comes from. That's where the Columbus discovery doctrine comes from. I write about in the book that anthropology is the handmaiden to American expansionism, and it was used as a tool. And I mean, we have to remember that it was formerly a part of the government as the Bureau of American Ethnology, and this is the time of Curtis and those photographs around the vanishing race of Native Americans, because they thought we were going to die, or they were hoping we were going to die. Matter of fact, one of the stories that I recount in the book has to do with Chief Seattle when he was being levered to sign the treaty that would give up most of their land. And basically the argument that the Indian agent was saying was, look, you guys are going to die, just sign the treaty. And his response is haunting and powerful. He says, well, he goes along with him to some degree and says, and I'm paraphrasing, Well, that might very well be true. But when I'm gone, and you're gone, and your children's children are playing in the woods and they think they're alone, they never will be, because me and all the souls of all my ancestors who have ever lived here will always be here and be with them. And so most cultures and societies believe in souls. Most of us believe in ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
But to think that, we were just going to disappear off the face of the earth doesn't sync with that. One of the other perspectives had to do with the Lakota chief around 1920, Luther Standing Bear, and he was upset about Europeans coming into his world, and he must have seen the beginning of the reservation period and the extinction of the bison and all the settlers coming across, origins and the time frames of cowboys on the plains, which wasn't very long. But again, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it says, the European calls this land a wilderness because they do not understand the contours of the mother's rocky spine. Their blood and bones have not been on this land long enough for the mother to recognize them. And he questions, don't they miss their sacred mountains and rivers and caves? And so you get this relationship of antiquity, of people being a part of the land and new people coming and wondering why they called it a wilderness. But there's all these accounts of Europeans first coming here, and that's the origins of Thanksgiving, right?
Sure.
That they didn't, they couldn't survive because they didn't understand how to survive in this land here. So all these stories just come to perspective of people who have lived on this land for a very long time, and I totally agree. I hear all these misconceptions all the time, and that's one of the reasons I decided to write a book and put it out there, because I got tired of people saying, well, the Native Americans say this, and elders of this tribe say this, and I'm like, you've never talked to one of our elders. So I decided to put myself out there to some degree and try to do some scholarly work and research and put some facts out there, and more importantly, begin to flesh out what I think is so important, cosmology. Reading and understanding all of the Greek pantheon of cosmology made me understand one thing for sure: all great societies looked to the stars to tell their stories.
Oh, for sure.
And that's all that we did here as well. And we looked to the stars to interpret stories, maybe to measure time, maybe to understand where we are in relationship to the rest of the celestial bodies in the universe. But it becomes this beautiful act of looking to the stars for an interpretation of what it means to be human, and that's what all these stories are. Now we've got the Greek pantheon, the astrological understanding of the stars, and what I'm understanding and trying to research and put together is that there was a version similar to that in the Americas, although the stories are all different, but it's the same thing.
Well, I can't wait until you do that, and I hope that you'll come back. And I mean, I love pantheons; they're like superheroes to me. But more important but more important, you're right, because it exposes, which sounds diabolical, but it exposes the commonalities, the similarities, because I'm not going to say all, but so many cultures from all over the world have similar pantheons and similar cultures, and sometimes something is prioritized over another, and it probably has to do with geographic or weather conditions. I mean, if you're in a place where there's lots of fresh water, the rain god maybe isn't as important than if you're someplace where, you're surrounded by salt water or you're in a desert, or close to a desert. But, or if you're in someplace where there's an apex predator, maybe a protector god or goddess is more important than a place where, you just got sort of smaller animals around you. I don't know. Coming up with stuff. But,
I think that's right, and that's why different tribes in North America have different clans. Just exactly what you're talking about. You find water god stories in Mesoamerica, and you find similar versions in North America as the rise of agriculture happened at Cahokia.
Yeah.
And there's a number of anthropologists and scholars who specialize in that. Tim Pocketat has done a lot of work with that most recently in understanding the comparisons between North America and Mesoamerica. But first father, first mother, thunder twins, whatever kind of twins, it's all the same story. So there was definitely cosmological transference in the Americas.
Well, I will go to my grave being convinced that Adam and Eve are twins. You can't tell me otherwise.
It's really interesting. At Cahokia, there was evidence of twins that were found. They were showered in funerary objects, but everyone assumed that they were two males, but they were in fact one male and one female.
Okay, there you go. Well,
Adam and Eve as twins. I like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, she comes from his rib, right? I mean, it's a clone or a twin. I mean, take your pick. What's the difference?
Now we're getting into the Sumerian stories,
right?
How we were created and why. I love it.
Right. Well, I mean, they're the same stories. The motive, if you take the Zechariah Sitchin, is different than the Sumerians themselves. But it's there's an element of fan fiction, but he gets some of the parts right. Anyway, well, he gets some of the parts right as our understanding is today. I mean, we assume we have translated these languages correctly and understand words the way they were understood, then in that time. Anyway, there's so many ifs, ands, and buts, but I think the similarities are unquestionable, and I love that you're doing this, and I also love that you cannot confirm some of those tales, because I've heard too many people say, well, I've spoken to the elders and the chiefs of those tribes will be the first ones to tell you this. I'm like, how come I've never heard them say it? I mean, and I've looked. I'm looking. I've spent 4 years looking actively, and I've spent the rest of my life, sort of being curious about things like this. And I've spoken to other people from indigenous cultures. I've had a lot of trouble with North America, but not so much South America and Mesoamerica. And none of them have said that. None of them said, yeah, white people. I mean, we're our saviors. I've never heard them say white people are gods. And so, so I'm. That's why I wanted to put it to you, and I got the expected answer.
I appreciate that. And in the end, it's that's one of the reasons why I did this. Is it's time that indigenous peoples tell our own stories in the way that they're supposed to be told in the right context, and understanding as much as we can by researching what it all means. And that's in essence what I have tried to do with this book, is to look at what's important cosmologically to the tribes and trying to explain it in a way that people can understand, and how it fueled civilization and how it drove the building of the mounds, ultimately trying to dispel this, myth of the nomadic savage that seems to be out there. Thank you, Hollywood. But that we built cities and we had advanced mathematics, not just sacred geometry, but sacred algebra. When you look at the formation and the building of the mounds and how complex they were, and arguably how many people were here as well. That's one of the things I get into. Different scholars' interpretations of how many people were here, but some of them are pretty mind-boggling. From 10 million up to 100 million. And science is through things like light and distance recognition, LIDAR, we're finding evidence of all these, the plethora of societies, multiplicity of societies, and Mesoamerica and South America and the Amazon and more Mayan communities. And we found additional ones in North America besides Cahokia, which is pretty hard to miss, but there's another one called Etzanoa, which might have been the famed city of gold that the conquistadors were trying to find, which they never found.
Yeah, we're the wrong continent.
There's a lot more happening in this place we call America today, 1,000 years ago and beyond. So if your listeners want to learn more about that, they can check out my book, Rediscovering Turtle Island, the First People's Account of the Sacred Geography of America, put out by Inner Traditions Press, distributed by Simon & Schuster. You can get it all over the place. Amazon, your local bookstore. You can go to www.rediscoveringturtleisland.com and find lots of interpretations and podcasts. I'll make sure that this one gets up there as well.
Excellent.
And very excited right now. I don't know when this is going to go live, but I am the author of the month on Graham Hancock's website. Just went live today.
Oh, great. Congratulations.
Thank you. And so I'll be interacting with that community and their forums and putting out some of these same ideas, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to discuss cosmology with you, Jeff. I knew that we would have a fun time doing this.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled.
To bring up different perspectives, and I know by you interacting with all your listeners, I can learn from that, and I share the same frustration with people speaking on behalf of indigenous people as if they were there or actually knew the right people to talk to. The other thing I just wanted to add from all of this is, as an indigenous person, I have been very careful to be respectful of things that can be shared and not shared, and not everyone knows those subtleties. I was very careful, for example, with illustrations and representations, not to put in any funerary objects and not to tell stories that I didn't, that I shouldn't be telling.
Right.
All the stuff that I interpreted came out of rock art and is there for everyone to see, and I just did all the research to pull it all together. But even as an indigenous person telling these stories, I have to be extremely meticulous and careful in my research and how I share everything. So hopefully people can appreciate that, and it's not just to make the assertion that I've spoke with the elders and the Indians and I know what they believe. It's that we can speak for ourselves.
Right.
And it should be much more interesting coming directly from the source. So thanks for having me. And when the next book comes out, Garden of Doom will be one of the places that I want to come back to.
Excellent. I'm thrilled to hear that. Thrilled to have you. Thanks so much for doing this. I know next week you're taking some much needed time off, so enjoy that time as well. Rest up. And thank you for being on the show. I'm going to read the book. Folks, just so that you know, we were originally going to record a week from now. I had an opening, so we scheduled earlier. I usually, well, you all know if you've been listening, that I do make it a point to read or listen to the book, whichever means is more easily available to me before the author comes on. And that's why I couldn't this time, but I'm absolutely going to read the book. It has made it to my office room, which means it's absolutely going to be dealt with, meaning read. And I can't wait for the next book to come out. I can't wait to have you on again and talk some more religion, mythology, lore, legend, whatever phraseology we want to use, and try to see some more of the similarities. And you can tell me if Red Horn is like Hercules or Gilgamesh, or is it a different thing altogether. It'll be a ton of fun. So
I appreciate the opportunity very much, and I will noodle on the comparisons between Red Horn and Heracles or Gilgamesh, and I'll get back to you on that.
Sure. We've all got the hero. So yeah, sounds good. And the Monkey King. I'm really fascinated about the Monkey King. He seems a little bit bumbling. You know what? A lot of the stories, I think a lot of the stories got sort of trivialized when they had to make it past Christian censors. I think a lot of the stories have been translated to us more silly than they really are, than they really were written. I know that for the Norse, like I'm like 100% on that. The Thor was not this bumbling. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but I am sure that you're going to get them as pure as you can and tell only what you can. And like I said, I can't wait for it. Thank you so much for being on the Garden of Doom. Is there any song that you would like as an outro?
I haven't thought about that.
You can shoot it to me. You can think about it and then shoot it to me in the email or whatever.
I love John Coltrane.
John Coltrane. Okay. I will find out for John Coltrane, and then there's something.
My favorite things.
My favorite things. Done. Done and done. All right. Thank you so much.
I'm glad this worked out tonight.
Me too.
And like you had mentioned, I've been hard at podcast and everything else, and I've got a much needed break coming next week. So just a little bit before Professor Keene goes back to the classroom.
Yeah.
One other thing, if people want to follow me, most of it happens on Instagram as Taylor Keene 7.
Okay, there we go. All right, wonderful. Thank you. Get some rest. Yeah, podcasting can be hard. It's hard on your voice and all that. Keeping the energy, telling the same thing over and over again, it can be tough. So folks.
This was a very enjoyable experience. I appreciate that.
Excellent. That's what I love to hear. All right, everyone, thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope that you buy his book. I hope that you buy his next book. And give us a rating and a review, and check out his stuff on the Graham Hancock site. That's not whether you like Graham Hancock or not. That is not a little deal. You don't have to like Marvel Comics to know that if they're making a movie for you in Marvel Comics, that's a big deal. So anyway. So good luck, continued success, and get the truth out there, because there's a lot of corrupted stuff out there, which I don't want to go into the motivations. We can all speculate on those, but it's a little silly, you know. It's just, but it's not. It's worse than silly. Silly is the wrong word. Anyway. We've talked about it already. I'm going to let you go and have a good night. And folks, you'll hear from us later in the week.